We always hear that we need to engage our diaphragm when we're breathing, and a lot of people don't really know what that means. You might just think that it simply means sticking your belly out when you're breathing, but if you really want to do it right, you have to train your body in how to properly use your diaphragm in the first place. And you might even have to do this before you even focus on your breathing. So I'm going to go over a few exercises on how to activate your diaphragm and naturally incorporate it with your breathing. Now, before I get into that, I want to talk about the importance of the diaphragm in the first place. Your diaphragm is this muscle that rests right below your lungs. And when you inhale, your diaphragm should contract and move downwards. In doing so, it'll expand the lungs and allow them to fill up with air. And then when you exhale, your diaphragm should relax and push upwards and help push that air out. So there's two main functions of your diaphragm that I want to talk about. The first is it'll ensure that you use your lungs' whole capacity. Why is this important? Well, instead of just breathing with the upper half of your lungs and the upper half of your chest, like most people are, when you engage your diaphragm, it'll allow you to fill your whole lungs with air. In doing so, you will naturally slow down your breathing. Now that on its own has its own benefits too. But when you only use your upper half of your lungs and your upper half of your chest, the problem with this is it engages your sympathetic nervous system. And this is basically your body's fight or flight system. And if you're constantly in this state, then you're going to be chronically stressed and a lot more anxious. When you start to engage the bottom half of your lungs, this will actually engage your parasympathetic nervous system. And this is important for rest and relaxation. And also breathing quicker in general will also engage your sympathetic or fight or flight mode. So it's also good to breathe slower in this aspect. And also when you engage your diaphragm and end up using your whole lungs capacity, this will ensure that your air in your lungs gets spread out across the whole surface area of your lungs. And this is really important because this will allow for more CO2 retention or carbon dioxide retention. Whenever you breathe, when you inhale, that's when you're going to get your oxygen. And when you exhale, that's when you release your CO2 or carbon dioxide. Now, you don't get any CO2 from the air around you. There's only like 0.03% CO2 in our air. You only get CO2 from your body's metabolism. So as you're holding your breath or if you exercise, your CO2 is going to build up. Now, a lot of people think that CO2 is a waste product and we just need to get rid of it from our body, but that couldn't be more wrong. Our CO2 is what controls our blood pH, or the acidity level of our blood. Now, this is really important because our pH can only be between 7.35 and 7.45. If our pH gets too high or too low, then we can die. Now, our body luckily has its own buffers and mechanisms to keep our pH in check. But in order to create these buffers and do these mechanisms, it needs to have enough CO2. Now, our CO2 is also our trigger to take the next breath. As our CO2 builds up, when it gets past a certain point, that will trigger something in our brainstem to breathe. Now, the problem here is when you start breathing too quickly, you start expelling a lot of the CO2 in your body. And instead of engaging your diaphragm and taking slower, longer breaths like you should, if you're taking shorter, quicker, shallower breaths, then your body's going to still have enough oxygen, but it's not going to have enough CO2. And the problem here is without enough CO2, then this oxygen is not going to be delivered to your cells, even if it gets into your lungs. This is actually something called the Bohr effect. So once your oxygen gets into your lungs, it'll attach to a molecule called hemoglobin. And this hemoglobin will carry this oxygen kind of like a train, with the oxygen being the passengers, and carry it to all the cells that need oxygen. So for example, there's cells in your brain that need oxygen. This hemoglobin will carry this oxygen to your brain, but in order for that oxygen to detach from that hemoglobin and go into your cells in your brain, you need to have enough CO2 because you need to have a certain pH level. If that pH level isn't hit, then this oxygen will stay attached to that hemoglobin and never reach the cells in your brain. This is why so many people can be chronically tired even though they have enough oxygen in their body, because if they don't have enough CO2, then they're not going to get this oxygen into their cells. This is why breathing with your diaphragm is so important, because it can make your breathing a lot more efficient. Now, the second major thing that using your diaphragm does is it is the main muscle that drives lymph in your body. Your lymph is part of your lymphatic system, and it's a drainage system in your body. Basically, you have your blood, which goes into your tissues, and it has to make its way back to your heart. But after it goes into your tissues, it turns into lymph. And this is when it goes through the lymphatic system first before it gets carried back into the bloodstream. Your lymphatic system is very important. It's part of your immune system, and it prevents things from kind of swelling up in your body. And in your lymphatic system, this lymph will pass through these lymph nodes, which have these white blood cells in them. This is what will kill all the germs in that lymph, and this is what will make that fluid clean before it enters the bloodstream. Your diaphragm will help drive this lymph throughout your body and help prevent it from swelling up in certain areas and basically encourage this drainage system. An example of what this could look like if it is not done correctly is your tonsils and adenoids. Your tonsils and adenoids are part of your lymphatic system. Now, a lot of people, when they're younger, their tonsils and adenoids can get infected and start to get swollen. Now, you can imagine if your lymphatic system isn't being drained properly, and if you have these tonsils and adenoids that are also swollen with lymph, that are also infected, that can be really uncomfortable and also be really hard for people to breathe properly. Now, a quick side note, there are some other things, especially with your breathing, that can help prevent tonsil and adenoid infection. So I made a separate video on that. If you want to watch it, I'm putting a link in the description below. But I'm hoping you understand the importance of using your diaphragm. So how can you properly use it? Well, a lot of people have what's called a stiff diaphragm. So even if you stick your belly out when you're breathing, it's still not going to activate it. So the first thing you got to do is just focus on using your diaphragm and not even on your breathing at all. So you can sit up straight, put one hand on your chest, and put one hand just above your belly button. And then what you want to do is you want to focus on your bottom hand and focus on pushing that hand outward and then back inward. You don't have to focus on your breathing at all right now. Just focus on moving that hand forward and backward. This is a really good exercise if you have a stiff diaphragm. You can also perform this exercise while lying down with your knees bent. So if you're lying on your back with your knees bent, same thing, put one hand over your chest, one hand right above your belly button, and try to just focus on pushing the hand out and pushing the hand back in. And there's also another exercise you can do for a stiff diaphragm, and this is actually my favorite exercise. First, do a normal inhale and exhale through your nose, and then after the exhale, hold your breath. So put one hand over your nose, and then make sure your lips are sealed. Then you want to try to take an inhale and exhale through your nose while you're holding your breath. You'll notice that this will naturally engage your diaphragm without actually breathing. You should feel your stomach moving in and out while doing this. Keep doing this up until you have a pretty strong urge to breathe. And then once you do have to breathe, try to only breathe through your nose and try to keep engaging that diaphragm. If you practice this a few times, it'll help relax your diaphragm and also help incorporate using your diaphragm with your actual breathing. Once you can properly feel like you can move your diaphragm, now it's time to actually incorporate it with your breathing. So next, just like before, we're gonna put one hand over our chest and one hand right above our belly button. You also wanna make sure that you relax all your muscles. Try not to be tense anywhere. Now, when you take an inhale, try to again push that lower hand outwards. You don't want to over-exaggerate any of these movements, so don't try to push it out more than it needs to be. Just try to gently push your lower hand out, just like you were doing before. And then when you exhale, again, bring that abdomen in and bring that lower hand in. Try keeping this up for a few minutes, and the more you practice this, the better you'll get at naturally engaging your diaphragm. And again, just like before, you can also practice this by lying on your back with your knees bent, with your hand over your chest and belly button if you like that position better. So I hope you guys liked that video, and I hope you guys learned the importance of engaging your diaphragm, and I hope you can all start using your diaphragm on a daily basis. Have you ever wondered what happens during a root canal? And is it really as scary as it sounds? Did you just say root canal? Oh no. In this video, I'm gonna break down root canal step by step for you so that it can hopefully make it less intimidating for you, especially if you were told that you need a root canal or you're scheduled to get one. So root canal